Okay, awesome. Right. Welcome, everyone. We are here today for Being Your Brand live series. And today I have the amazing Simon Alexander Ong. Before I introduce him, what I would like to just share is what is Being Your Brand series
Mm,
all about. And basically, it's a conversation. It's a conversation with visionary founders who are making an impact and have had commercial success whilst leading with their personal brand. And I thought, you know what, it would be really lovely to have conversations with people like Simon and other visionary leaders, founders, who have been doing this really, really well. And this isn't so much about the journey of what's got them to here.
mm.
It's more about who have they had to become and who is the being behind the brand to make all of this happen. So I am going to introduce Simon here. Welcome, Simon. Thank you
Thank you,
again
Aarti.
for agreeing to do this and have this conversation. Hi, Natalie. Thank you for coming in. Yes, I love Simon too, and yeah, he's brilliant. And we're going to find out even more how brilliant he is. So, a little intro to Simon. So, I've written something out here, so I'm going to read it so I don't get it wrong. So, here we go. Simon Alexander Ong is a best-selling author, award-winning life coach, YouTuber, and today I checked it, Simon, you have 159,000. I know just a short while ago you were celebrating 100,000 subscribers. Now you've got
Yeah.
159,000. And an international keynote speaker, widely respected for his wisdom, energy, and transformative insights. And I can absolutely vouch for that. Simon, I've known you probably like over 9 years now.
Yeah.
We met
Mm,
through the coaching academy, and I remember even then, and I was, a student at that point with the
mm,
coaching academy, and I just remember you just being just full of value and
mm.
wisdom at that time, and I was just like, who is this guy? He's just so kind and generous with his knowledge and all of those kind of things. Um, and in addition to that, I just want to also add into this bio, you also have your debut book, Energize, which
Mm,
became an instant bestseller and is a powerful guide to unlocking sustainable energy,
mm.
creativity, and purpose in both life and business. When you even just hear that, Simon, I mean, that's just a little short snippet. How does that make
Mm.
you feel?
I think it always gets me reflecting, Artie, about the journey. I think so often we can look at ourselves and think how much further we've got to go. We all have our own sort of personal and professional goals, but when you hear something like that, it really makes you stop and reflect on just how far you've come, which I don't think many of us do in our busy lives. It makes you reflect on just how far you've come and also the journey that it's taken to get to that point. Because as you said in the beginning, it's about who you become. That is the greatest reward, not what you get.
Yeah,
And we all have to go through our own metamorphosis, and I'm sure we'll touch on some of that today. But it just makes me reflect on that journey.
yeah, beautiful. And actually, let's delve straight into this question that I've been wanting to ask you. So, who have you had to become to
Mm.
achieve all of this? What have been your daily rituals or practices or non-negotiables in order to get to these kind of achievements?
Sure. Well, I think part of who I've had to become, and you kind of mentioned a little bit just now in the introduction, Artie. The person I had to become, especially when I moved from corporate to entrepreneurship. So it's important to get that context. I wasn't always in entrepreneurship. I never grew up in a family that was focused on
Mhm.
building businesses. I came from the corporate world. That was my first career, and so to go from the corporate world to become an entrepreneur, one of the things I had to become was a person of value. And you touched on that in the introduction, because I realized that the only way to show people what I could offer was to be that person of value, find ways that I could add value into people's lives with no expectation of anything in return. And this taps into an idea that I call increasing your surface area of luck. If you want to be a magnet for luck and opportunities, then you've got to show up and put yourself out there. And part of that process is seeing ways that you can add value. And now when I say add value, it doesn't mean looking for a financial benefit, because that's what a lot of us default to thinking about, is how can I sell my services, how can I sell my products. But it's thinking about non-monetary ways that you can add value. So something as simple as an introduction, a referral, sharing a book, sharing an article or podcast episode that could be relevant to what that person has shared with you. And that was one of the things I had to become more of, be that person of value. Listen to what people were sharing with me to find those opportunities in the conversation of how I could be that person of value. And second is to become somebody who could take some risk. Because one of the things I observed about people ahead of me was that not all risk takers will be winners, but all winners are risk takers. So anybody who had achieved something of note had taken some risk. And so I had to become somebody who became comfortable with risk, somebody who could take some calculated risk to do things most people wouldn't do in order to kind of get access to these opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And actually that really nicely leans into, building your personal brand and reputation, because, there is a bit of, I feel like there is a bit of a misconception around personal brand, and it's all about
Mm.
being visible, when actually it's not. It's about probably some of, like you've touched on, some of the actions and
Mm.
what you are doing and delivering with intent
Yeah.
that then starts to create that kind of reputation. So it's not just about,
Mm.
posting offers and services
Mm.
online. It's much more omnipresent than that, and it is probably a lot more strategic than that, and like I said,
Mm.
intentional. So how have you been doing this over the years?
It certainly evolves, Artie. The world has changed. When I first started, it was all about one-to-one coaching. That's how my business started. It was about working one-on-one with people. And so what I did is I said to myself, every week, I have to be putting myself into situations where I could have powerful conversations with people, just to learn about their challenges, their goals, and their aspirations. So I could then invite them to have a deeper one-on-one conversation to see how I could be of value, if I could be of value. And
Mm,
so for me, it was about how I showed up in those conversations, showing up as somebody who really wanted to understand people, that was curious and inquisitive about their own journey. And of course, that then adapted into speaking. So speaking was all about how could I, when I had the opportunity, how could I deliver value to the audience? And
mm,
thinking about it now, this is why I think a lot of people get nervous when they speak in front of an audience. It's because they focus inward. What if I forget to say this? What if I don't mention this story? What if people don't like it? And now that's a very inward focus. But for
mm,
me, in order to, again, add value and sort of start building my brand, it was all about focusing outward.
mm,
What would make this talk enjoyable for them? What sort of feeling do I want them to walk away from this event experiencing? And so that kind of dictated how I went about my speaking. And
mm,
that kind of led to more speaking and more interest in what I was doing. And then it was taking that, which a lot of that at the time was offline. So going to a networking event is a very offline activity. Speaking in front of an audience is a very offline activity. And learning how I could then apply that online, because online is a very different arena. And so
mm,
online was the same thing. What could I post, wherever it was video, articles, images, and so on, that would add value to my audience? So they would walk away thinking, actually, I learned something from stopping by Simon's content today. And the
mm,
more I could do that, not only was I improving their lives, but they could then share this with their audience. They could then share this with their community or their own clients. And so I
mm.
started doing that, and that's how I began to grow my online following.
Right.
And then that's evolved into, obviously, outside of coaching and speaking. Then you mentioned YouTube, and obviously on LinkedIn, my newsletter. That then allowed me to try different mediums in order to replicate what I was doing in a very strategic and intentional way, but
Mm.
as a way of expanding and scaling the brand.
Wonderful, wonderful. And for those people who are listening in, and by the way, hi Natalie, hi Simon, nice to have you here. Um, for those people that are listening in and maybe even in the replay later, because right now it
Mm.
rolls off your tongue quite easily, the
Mhm.
speaking and the YouTube and that kind of thing. But were there moments where you're like, when you're getting onto stages where you're like, oh gosh, can I do this? Is this for me? All those like thoughts that
Yeah.
arise on something when we're not familiar with.
Mm.
it's new to us.
Yeah.
How do you overcome that? Because there's always that next evolution, right? There's always that
Ab-
next step.
Absolutely. I think uh, first thing to understand is that we all have that. I still have that now, and you will continue to have it, just in different forms. But I see it as a good thing, actually. I see it as a bad thing if you're not experiencing that.
Mm,
Because whenever you do something for the first time, so for example, when I first started doing the YouTube, when I first started speaking, because there's no reference point, there's nothing for you to reference because you don't have the experience yet. Of course, you're going to feel a little bit nervous. You're going to have a few questions in your head. But
mhm,
that for me is a good thing. It shows you're growing. It shows you're doing something you've never done before. And afterwards, you're going to fill up your confidence bank. So what you actually need before you get on that stage or shoot that YouTube video or share that bit of content is not confidence, it's courage. The courage to just put yourself out there despite the fears, despite the doubts, and to trust that you have some value to offer. And
mm,
once you've done that, however it goes, you now begin to build reference points, and that builds your confidence. So
yeah,
then you get the next opportunity. You now can say, hey, I've done it before. I'm sure I can improve on that in the next opportunity I get. And so what I intentionally do now is think to myself, how can I put myself in positions where I will feel a little stupid, where I will feel like a beginner who has no clue whether this is the right thing to do or not? Because if I can do that, quite often, what happens is that I'm going to grow faster than other people. It's
mm,
when you kind of look at these things and say, actually, I think I better stick to what I'm familiar with. That's when you begin to stagnate because the world doesn't stay still.
mm,
Especially if you look at the advancement of artificial intelligence, that's only going to accelerate into the future. And so, what you want to constantly be thinking to yourself is, how do I disrupt my business myself now, so that I can adapt my skill set to a market that is rapidly changing. So
mm,
just like when I went from coaching to speaking to YouTube to maybe investing in businesses to growing a newsletter, or maybe doing lots of podcast interviews. How do I ensure that I can adapt myself so I remain relevant? Number one, number two, so I can rise to these new challenges. And number three, make sure I'm growing. I'm becoming better than who I was yesterday, and not someone who's kind of just settled in their ways and is very dogmatic about how I build businesses.
yeah. And I just want to go a bit more
Mm,
granular into that. How do you ensure that you know, adapt? What does
yeah.
Simon do to adapt?
So there's something. So my background is from East Asia and the Far East, and I grew up learning martial arts, Arti. I did karate when I was young. I did
Mm,
taekwondo when I was at
ah,
university,
I
and I
did
did a bit of
taekwondo.
and I did a bit of Wing Chun post kind of formal education when I started my first few jobs in finance. I kept
Mhm,
myself fit by doing some Wing Chun on the side.
nice.
And there's this one idea for martial arts that I guess keeps me adaptable, and it's this idea of a white belt mentality.
Mm,
Now, if you've ever studied martial arts, you know there's a belt system. So when you begin, there's a white belt. When you get to the end, you get the black belt.
yeah,
And I remember reading a study that showed once people got the black belt, on average, they began to train less because they were then able to tell their friends and family, hey, I'm a black belt, I've got the black belt. And so there was less motivation to continue to be consistent in your training. Whereas if you were a white belt, there was that thirst, that hunger, that drive to kind of move along the belts.
mm,
And so by maintaining that white belt mentality, it means you have the humility to be open to different perspectives. You have the humility to learn from other people, no matter where you are in your journey, and that you can adapt.
mm,
Because new knowledge becomes available, new ideas, new systems, new tools. It means that you can test things as a beginner on a constant basis. For me, the real challenge I see, and this is why I think that white belt mentality is so important, the biggest challenge I see is not becoming successful, because I think we're in a world today where it has never been easier to become successful in a field,
mm,
because you've got all the knowledge you need. You go into YouTube, you type in a question, you've got people that are talking about your very question. You go to a bookstore, you've got self-help books, business books, biographies. There's lots of blueprints out there. The real challenge is remaining who you are once you're successful. And for me, that is the ability to constantly see yourself as a beginner, not to be wedded to your achievements. Otherwise, ego takes over.
yeah.
Ego takes over. And for me, that's a recipe for disaster.
Mm. And actually, let's talk about ego. especially when you become more known, more
Yeah.
visible, more people want you on their stages.
Yeah.
Do you manage that ego? Because, we've seen it with
Mm,
other people, and you're like, okay, that person didn't used to be that way, but you can
mm,
see it has affected them in
yeah.
some way or another. How does Simon manage that part of
Yeah,
fame?
there's a saying, I don't know who said it, but there's a saying that goes, head in the clouds, feet on the ground. And
Mm,
so what that saying means is that head in the clouds means you have big, bold ideas of what you want to do with your life, what you want to do with your career. So that's kind of tapping into that visionary side of things. Feet on the ground means you remain humble and grounded in your journey forwards. And what keeps me grounded is the people I have around me. My wife, my daughter, my close friends, the people who are kind of on a similar path or maybe a few steps ahead of me, who
mm,
know what sort of challenges I'm likely to face. They kind of keep me grounded. And also, I'm very conscious not to forget how I got to where I am today. And I know it's a journey that is never done alone. You do it with the support of people, whether it's people that have championed your work, people that have referred you business, people that have kind of believed in you from the beginning when you were nobody. And so for me, it's all about, well, how do I share or express my gratitude, even if it's just a small gesture.
mm,
And I was inspired. It was years ago. I remember reading an article about Tom Cruise and how he would always arrive hours before a film premiere in order to sign autographs, take people's phone calls, take selfies and videos with the audience way before the premiere started. And I
mm,
said to myself, this is a guy who is one of the most famous actors on the planet, and he doesn't have to do that. He
yeah,
can just rock up at the beginning of a premiere, say a few hires, and get interviewed by the press on site, go to watch the film, and be done. But he intentionally rocks up hours before the premiere just to express his gratitude to all the cinema goers who have waited sometimes days to get a glimpse of their hero. And so that kind of inspired me. I'm no Tom Cruise, but what I can do in my small way is I can express my own gratitude. So when I
mm,
do events, instead of rushing off, I love staying behind, talking to people, signing their books, just kind of hearing where they're at in their journey, and just giving everyone a chance to be heard. Because I'm grateful for the fact they showed up.
mm.
They paid a ticket, they came to an event, and my small way of saying thank you is just by listening to your question or your thought, and seeing what advice I can share.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I can absolutely vouch for that, Simon, because I've seen you on stages, I've seen
Mm,
you in, being part of the audience, and I've always seen that consistency of you being so, so humble and just
mm,
chit-chatting and, sharing, doing what you're doing, the value piece.
mm.
And, I also want to ask, like, for people who are listening in, because there's that whole element of like, am I going to make it? And I want to be successful. How about on
Mm,
the other flip side, where people are also feeling like the fear of success?
mm,
Things get more expansive, bigger, you're more known. How do you manage that? Or what would you share for people that are still, building up to maybe where you are right now on global
mm.
stages, that
Yeah.
kind of thing?
For me, it's tapping into the activity of visualization.
Mhm,
So what I mean by this is that you have your present moment where you are right now, and then you have this ideal future where you would like to be in terms of your personal life and your business life. And what you want to do is prepare your mind now for when that happens. So it could be, okay, great. When I'm traveling the world to speak on stages, when I'm working with some of the best known people in their field, when I've got this amount of followers, close your eyes and visualize how could you manage your life so that this doesn't overwhelm you. What would you be doing so that this is something you can actually enjoy, not fear, so that you can be humble enough to enjoy that experience that very few get to have, but also still be you. What would you be doing when that is in your life? So when you mentally prepare yourself for that, it's kind of the same thing like how you become. And there's a concept I heard from a guy called Vishen Lakhiani called money
oh,
magnet.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
when the way you mentally prepare yourself to be a money magnet is you already start planning now. Let's say, I don't know, you get 10 million cash in your bank account. How would you be allocating that 10 million cash as if you had it now. So you actually create an Excel spreadsheet. You say, okay, I've got 10 million cash right now in my bank account. What percentage would I put into my savings? What percentage would I put into my investments? What percentage would I kind of splash out on, like, I don't know, a nice car, holiday, house, and so on? So what happens is, by mentally rehearsing now in the present that future, not only are you connecting yourself closer to that, but you're allowing your mind to understand, well, when that happens, how do I not fear it, but actually make myself want to enjoy it? So when this happens, I'm actually going to enjoy it. And so
Yeah.
that makes it more of an enjoyable journey to get there. And for me, it turns it into a bit of a game, because when
Mm.
something feels like a chore, guess what? You're going to hate it after a while. Even though you've got to
Yeah.
be consistent in the process, if it begins to feel like a chore, you're going to hate the journey. But if you can turn it into a bit of a game, a bit of a challenge, what happens is there's a different sort of energy that comes with it. You want to show up for the challenge. You want to play the game. You want to see how far you can go. You want to move up a level. You want to take on the next obstacle. It becomes far more enjoyable.
Yeah, yeah, gamifying it. And I remember actually you
Mm,
sharing about gamifying things when, gosh, this was many years ago. I was in your
yeah.
masterclass. Remember those, right?
Mm,
Those in person,
yeah.
and yeah, anyway, guess what I'm going to be doing after this call? Getting my Excel sheet ready.
Mm.
I'm sure a lot of us will probably give that a go. Tell us, Simon, like we have visions, we have missions for our
Mm,
business and brand and that kind of thing. And then there are times, be it in our life, be it in our business,
yeah.
the reality is, challenges do arise.
Mm.
How do you hold the vision still for your business when, frankly, when shit hits the fan?
Yeah. I think again, this is much more of a mental challenge to go through, because and I found this tough myself, because when I left corporate, I knew I had kind of just burnt the boats, if you will, and have
Mhm.
moved into a completely different line of work where I would be the biggest influence on whether this would succeed or not, because especially this is a business that relies on me. This is a business where people are buying into my service. And when things didn't go well, for example, rejections, and people didn't book me, or they booked me and they cancelled, and so I had to kind of adapt a lot. And you had various things that were thrown your way from the universe.
Yeah.
What I began to understand is that in order to move forward with peace and calmness, which actually is a tough skill to master, especially in the moment. But if
Mm.
you can remain calm and you can look at things in a very objective way, when the proverbial shit hits the fan, then what happens is that ability to choose your response rather than emotionally react is going to
Mm.
be a superpower. And
Yeah.
so part of that is, number one, it was finding peace with the fact that life is going to throw me curveballs.
Yeah.
This is going to happen. So it's not like I'm not factoring it in. I have to mentally understand that this is going to happen at some point that I cannot predict. But at the same time, on the other side, if that's true, then it must also be true that at any moment my life could change for the better. That
Yes.
you never know what could land in your inbox, what call you might get, what DM you might get in your social platform. Your life can also change for the better. So you have to accept this duality that at any given moment, life could take a turn for the worse, but at the same time, life could take the turn for the better. And so that's the first thing I had to accept. Number two is, I saw it, again, think about this gamified mindset. I saw it as kind of an obstacle, but in a good way, because for me, I saw it as a test. How much do you want this? If it
Mm.
was easy, everybody would do it. If it was easy, everybody would already be at the finish line. But this is life's way of testing how much you want it, because you're going to learn far more from those setbacks and sideways or kind of U-turns in life than your successes. Success only feeds your ego, but it's the challenges and setbacks that build your character. And I think that's what contributes more to long-term success. And the
Mm.
third thing is to have the right people around you. So, when you go through tough periods, which you will go through, whether it's in your personal life or whether it's on your professional journey, if you only keep it up here, that is dangerous, because it puts you in a mode of thinking about your thinking about your thinking, and that creates anxiety. And once you have
Mm.
anxiety, you start to question yourself. You start to doubt yourself even more. So what helps me is doing a few things. One is journaling, so being able to download my thoughts onto paper and to better understand me and my thoughts. After all, the beginning of wisdom is knowing yourself. And then two is having people around me that I could share this with, whether it's my wife, whether it's my mastermind group, whether it's my mentors or coaches, having people I could share my challenges and obstacles with. Because I
Yeah.
found when I spoke about them, and I think this is especially hard for the average man more than the average woman, when I spoke about them, not only did it get it off my chest, but it allowed me to explore them in a way where I could see it from a different perspective. So I think that's what helped me navigate those. And I'm still facing them now. They just have evolved into different challenges and setbacks. But I think when you have gone through a few, then it builds that uh, experience on how to kind of respond when it happens again.
Absolutely. And ultimately, then that's how it, comes back down to the
Mm,
being in your brand, because that will determine, how you show up, what choices you are
mm,
making, what informed decisions you are
yeah.
taking to continue to work towards that mission, that vision, even
Mm,
whilst life is lifing, in that sense. And actually, let me
mm.
just touch on that. In having, I saw your mission statement on, well, your mission, on your website. How important has that been in terms of anchoring you and, well, knowing that in terms of anchoring your business and yourself and your
Sure.
growth?
So I think when you have clarity as to why you are doing what you do, at the beginning, it might sound a bit fluffy. It might sound like, well, can I actually achieve this? The reason you want to have a bit of clarity on what that is, written down, published, where you can see it, it's because on the good days, you might not connect with it as much because you're just in the process of doing. You're just kind of getting stuff done to move forward. But it's on the down days where that really helps you because it reminds you why you are doing this. When
Mm,
you go for a tough period, I'll give you an example. When COVID happened, not only did my wife and I have our first child, I got a book deal, but I had to adapt my business.
mm,
A lot of my business at the time was speaking, and
mhm,
so suddenly overnight, all the speaking events I was invited to got cancelled. And so I had to adapt my business. I had to, spend a lot more time with the family because my wife had just had a C-section. So she was kind of out of action for 6 to 8 weeks, and I had to take on a lot more responsibilities. And there was a point in that journey where I wasn't actually sure if I was going to finish writing the book. I was saying things to myself such as, what would happen if I asked for an extension? What if I don't finish it in time? Uh, Maybe something I should put on hold for now until a few years later. And then I kept coming back to that mission and that vision. And I reminded myself, Simon, you are in a position that many people would dream about.
yeah,
Not only do you have a book deal, you're working with Penguin and you have a great team who are supporting you.
yeah.
Just remember that and remember your mission. And
Mm,
that's when I think it really helped me. In those moments where you question if you should pack it in, where you
mm,
question whether you're actually on the right path, you remind yourself why you're doing it. And I think that's when it really helps you. When you have the clarity on your vision and mission, it's in those tough moments that it reminds you why you decided to begin this journey in the first place.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And definitely echo that. I've gone through my own challenges, and it was that mission and purpose that
Mm,
kept me going, allowed me to still show up and,
mm,
keep driving
yeah.
towards that. Thank you everybody for joining us and sharing some of your comments here. If you do have one question for Simon, we can ask him. But I would also like to ask you, Simon, just to kind of wrap things up, for people that are thinking more and more about, and
Mm,
I would say it's more about, self identity. Building a personal brand is very much connected to self awareness and
yeah.
your own, self identity, coming back to the being in the brand. What 2 to 3 tips would you like to leave people whilst they are doing this and or wanting to do more of this, and
Mm,
build, become more conscious,
mm,
conscious leaders in that sense?
mm. Well, I would say number one, I think this is almost like a foundational step, is you want to think about who are the people or businesses that you follow that inspire you from a brand point of view. So, for example, think about all the brands that you purchase. It could be clothing brands, technology brands, clothing, shoes, whatever it is. So look at all the brands that you are a consumer of. Why do you buy their products and services? What is it about them that makes you want to become a loyal follower? And then also the people you follow on social media that you look up to. What is it about them and their brand that makes you want to follow their content or to follow what they share? And then when you've written down your thoughts on that, ask yourself, well, what would make somebody want to follow me? So you're kind of reverse engineering this. You're looking at what makes you follow other brands, and then you want to think about, well, what would make someone want to follow me? And that helps you just to map out your own values as a person and as a business. And that for me then informs everything else. Because if you don't know what you want to stand for, if you don't know what your values are, then it doesn't matter what you do on the tactical and the strategical side of things. So that for me is almost step one. Step two is then think about your strengths and how you can integrate that as part of your brand. So for example, if I talk about myself, I love speaking. So, somebody can say, Simon, can you go on a stage and talk for 20 minutes? I'm like, great, I'd love to do that. That comes very easy to me, much more than I would say writing. So then the question for me is then, how do I leverage that skill of speaking in order to share my values to build my brand? So it could be, for example, if we've ever connected on LinkedIn, chances are you would have probably received a voice note from me. Because it's a way for me to share a bit of my energy when I connect with someone on LinkedIn to say, hey, great to connect with you. Look forward to learning more about your work. And that just takes me a few seconds, but it's a way to leverage my love of speaking. Or it could be finding opportunities to be a guest on podcasts where I can start to share my value and share my insights with that person's audience. So that's almost step two. And think about your strengths and how you can use that to express your values. And then number three is make sure you spend more time creating than consuming. So too many of us spend much more time consuming, just scrolling through our social media content, rather than spending more time creating. Because it's only when you create, and as humans, we're born to create. It's only when we create that we can then start sharing who we are, our values, and our message with the world. And now when I talk about creation, again, it's finding what your method is. It could be writing, it could be speaking, it could be video content, it could be illustration. Whatever that medium is, test them, find the best one that works for you and start there.
Brilliant tips. I think, if you didn't catch all of that, do go and watch the recording again and take the notes. And also what I'm really hearing here as well is, the importance of knowing your values and what you're good at, rather than guessing and chasing trends and that kind of thing, and riding on trends that before you haven't even thought about, well, actually, what do I want to be known for? What are my values? Because that also then determines the experiences that you want to provide for other people, and it comes through. And I've seen it done beautifully with you, Simon. You've done a whole variety of different things, from live experiences, from restaurants to a whole variety. I remember even you doing the whole sort of virtual.
Oh yeah, the sort of book launch in the metaverse.
Yeah, book launch in the metaverse, to creating on-brand, online brand experiences. And for me, everything that you did, it still felt very Simon. It wasn't you like, okay, that person did that, let me go and try that. It was like, okay, no, it's that creativity. It's that, right, let me give people a valuable experience. And I've again, because I've been in the world, I've seen that consistency. And that's the beauty also about having that bigger mission, vision, purpose, and the values then which then get to flow through everything that you then create and do. Okay, we've got a couple of questions. So Shub, how do you convince people to be patient for the outcome would come out of the work you are putting in?
Okay, so without knowing the context, I'll just take it on sort of a macro overview. How do you convince people to be patient for the outcome would come out of the work you are putting in? Well, first of all, there's this concept called persuasion. I think it was coined by Robert Cialdini. I kind of did this before, but Robert Cialdini kind of formalized it through a term called persuasion. So what persuasion means is that you have pre-sold them before you even have that first conversation. So if you have to convince people of an outcome, it means they don't trust you can deliver the outcome. So you have to show them that you are the right person to help them achieve a particular outcome. And you do that through testimonials, you do that through video content, you do that through feedback, you do that from sharing what you've done before, your track record. So to give an example, if someone came to me and they said, hey, Simon, would love to book you to speak an event. Can we jump on a call next week? I might say, sure, yeah, let's jump on a call next Wednesday at 2 p.m. In the meantime, here's my speaker show reel. Here's an event I did in Dubai. And here's a podcast I did with one of the biggest podcasts in the world. And it gives them something for them to look through before we even jump on the call. So once we jump on the call, because they've looked through that content, that helps them to understand the value I can offer. And then they might go, great, we really want you to come and do this event because we've seen some of your content and would love you to share some of this stuff with the audience. So now they know I can deliver that. The question is, can we make this work? So back to your question, Shub, if you have to convince people about an outcome, then it's how can you build that trust better so they know you are the person that can deliver it. In terms of the patience, that comes down to your communication. It's how can you communicate what a realistic timeline is for a client or prospect to achieve that outcome. So you might say something like, when I work with my clients, we typically work for 6 months before we begin to see results. Now, if you communicate that in your copy, in your testimonials, in your sort of case studies, then that gives people, again, a sense of what a realistic timeline should look like. Otherwise, they're constantly having to chase and say, actually, we haven't seen any outcome yet. This, for me, if there's a miscommunication, that's where you get those questions.
Beautiful. Thank you. And just to add on to actually that trust piece, I like to call it transference of trust.
Yeah.
So what is it that I need to continue to transfer in order to build that trust? Wonderful. Thank you, Shub. And we're going to add Natalie's question here. Thank you, Natalie. I love your tip on creating versus consuming. How do you stay inspired about what to post, share, etc.? I can sometimes get stuck on what to share, especially when running other aspects of the business. Great question, Natalie.
Great question. And it's actually a question I get asked a lot about. And I would say the shortest answer to this is make sure that what you're doing every week is so interesting, so exciting, that there is so much that you can share. That it's actually a challenge not to share content because there's so much you can share. So what I mean by this is like, maybe you've got a coffee in the diary with someone interesting. That becomes a piece of content. You can talk about what you learned from that conversation. Maybe you go to an event, that becomes another bit of content you can share. Maybe you yourself did an event, maybe something didn't go well, but then you had a really good impact in another way. That becomes a story you can share. And so it's about how do you make your life, your business journey so interesting that there's just so much you can talk about in your content. And again, another activity as simple as journaling. If you journal on a regular basis, guess what? You now have content you can share. So it's how can you create all of these activities? They don't have to be something that takes up a lot of your time, but just really small activities that have variety in them, but give you content that you can share value to your audience. So to give an example, I had a client recently that started changing his environment of when he did his weekly sort of plans. And he started just going to places where he had beautiful views from a high up vantage point. So just to give an example, one of those was at the Shard. So he would go up to the Shard on a Sunday and plan his week. Now, he ended up writing about how altitude can influence your power of vision, because he found when he put himself in positions of altitude so he could see things from a bird's eye view, he was more inspired than doing things at a ground level. And again, that became a piece of content. So it's about putting yourself in positions where you can't help but have content to share. So that's kind of the short answer to that.
And what happens when you've got too much content to share?
But I always say that's a good problem to have then, because then if you have too much content to share, then you're in a luxurious position where you can schedule them. So you can schedule things. So let's say, I don't know, I've got 20 things I want to share. Well, hey, that's just bought you 20 days of content. That's nearly a month's worth of content that you can just schedule. So that's a far better position to be in than having to scramble for ideas and then just put out anything just to kind of keep the content bandwagon going.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I think there is just content everywhere. It's just teaching and training yourself to see it. And it could be even on inquiry
Yeah.
calls. It could be in
Mm.
networking meetings when you're just having conversations with people and it relates to something in your industry, or somebody's asked you something,
Yeah.
turn that into, a question on in
Mm.
your content, or a video or something along those kind of lines. Right, wonderful. I've taken up a lot of your time. Thank you so much. Simon, how can people get in touch with you? Where can they see your amazing content? Where would you like to point people?
Sure. So I'm on all the major social platforms. So if you like, you can add me on LinkedIn, connect with me on Instagram. My handle is at Simon Alexander O. Make sure to check out some of the YouTube videos. Again, just search my name, Simon Alexander Ong, on YouTube. And if you want to sort of catch up with some of my weekly learnings, then you can subscribe to my newsletter on my website, simonalexanderong.com.
Fantastic. Thank you. And feel free to share all these links. I think this will stay and as a recorded
Perfect.
piece of content here, so feel free to share. If anyone's got any other questions, you're watching the replay, please share what, if you've got any takeaways or what you learned. It's always lovely to hear. And I'll be back with another Being Your Brand live on the 17th of July, and I'll be announcing that next week. I've got another fantastic guest. Simon, thank you so much,
Thank
and
you.
I'm sure I'll be seeing you in some online and offline rooms soon.
Thank you so much, and take care, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.